What's up, friends? Today we are here with my mountain board, and today we're going to be putting on the Newbee gear drives, which are here in this package. Now, we're starting in kind of a weird place here because the way these gear drives work is the motor and motor pinion are like a separate piece. So we're going to put that Loctite and stuff on first, and I just wanted to show you I'm disassembling the rear end of my board dynamics setup here, and then when we start the assembly of these, there will be nothing on there. So sort of a before and after. The board dynamics set is on here right now, and you can see that over there. And we're gonna be swapping it over. So hopefully you guys will enjoy this video and find it very useful. And at the end, I will give you a little teaser of what these gear drives sound like. Alright, so I've got my board all ready for the assembly of the Newbee drive system. It's all disassembled, and here we have the box with all of the components in it. So we're going to go ahead and take them all out, and I'll lay them out on the table so you can see exactly how they come. Along with that, we've got our two motors here that I will be installing. They are some 6384 190 kV from Flipsky with an 8mm motor shaft. All right, so this came packed a lot better than it actually is right now. I just took some of it out of its packing in order to see everything that was in there. So I'm just gonna kind of take this out all mishmashed like and show you what it all is. It all came packed very well, wrapped in bubble wrap. So I think you guys would definitely appreciate that. Let's start with the motor plates. So this drive has a pretty unique way that it assembles, and this is how the motor plates ship. So we have the mounting plate that will attach to the truck. Mine are for Apex Airs, so they are perfect square. And then you've got the plate that the motor mounts to, and this is pretty unique. I haven't seen another gear drive that uses something like this yet. Well, actually maybe the LaQual ones do, but I'm not 100% sure. So you've got holes for the motor, and then you have holes that go through to mount it onto the drive. And I believe that this gear is press fit into this bearing. So I don't know if you can actually remove the gear from the bearing, but in any case, this is an angular contact bearing, so it will be taking the forces that go from the helical gear instead of having the motor gear, or the motor bearing take it, which is not designed for it. So hopefully this will be a nice, reliable system. So we got those. We got one for the left and one for the right. And then we have the wheel mounting plates. So I believe this will mount to either MBS or Trampa wheels. And this interfaces directly with the drive and has this small urethane piece that goes in here. And this urethane piece is typically called a spider, and it allows the shock loading to be transferred at a much more efficient and less impactful rate from the gears into the drive system. So very cool that Newbee included that in there. And to give you an example of how that works, we've got the drive part, which actually does come assembled like this. They weren't pressed together all the way. I don't know if that was on purpose or not, but that's how they come. And then this will interface onto here, and it's kind of hard to find the spot. There you go. And that is kind of what it looks like. So that goes onto your wheel, and then it will interface with the drive when you put the wheel on. Pretty cool. So anyway, this comes in the box like this, as well as the other side. So you already have these completely assembled. And oh, I just remembered, I took this apart so I could show you guys the inside of the drive. It's kind of hard to get these apart, actually, so you have to be careful. But I wanted to take it apart so I could show you guys because I think it is pretty neat. All right, so I managed to pop it off. In here you have a bearing. I'm pretty sure that this bearing is supposed to be pressed all the way down to be flat with the metal, but I'm not 100% sure, so we'll find that out when we assemble it. You got your two idler gears here, which are pre-assembled in place like this. I'm not gonna touch them. And then you've got your big drive gear, which is pre-assembled and screwed into the wheel adapter. And you've got your plate here. All looks very nice, very professional, well machined. Again, my only real concern is I'm not sure how far down this bearing is supposed to be pressed, because right now it's not pressed down very far, and I don't really want to use the gear to press it down on there, so we're just gonna have to see. So I've been looking around in here and I just noticed on these gears that the set screw threads go right through a tooth. And I may be a mechanical engineer, but I feel like this would be a little weird to anyone that looks at it. Am I supposed to put a set screw there? Was this a mistake? I don't know. Because the other one, this one seems more reasonable because it goes in between two teeth. But this one feels like it's going to mess with the plastic gear. It's hard for me to say, especially since it's not completely cleaned out. Let's see if you can see that there. It's not completely cleaned out. There's a little bit of metal chunks in there, so I'm gonna run it through with a tap real quick just to make sure, but it feels a little bit odd to me. The other one has a similar situation, but it's not as bad. It's at least a little bit more clean, so who knows, maybe it's fine. I'm just showing you guys what I've got here. So we're here trying to get this set screw to go into this motor gear, and having a pretty tough time getting it started in these threads because it's not even, so it's hard to get it lined up properly. And obviously I don't want to misthread it because that would be catastrophic. There would be no recovering. So I'm trying to get it in. It's just a real problem. I realize I'm doing this slightly out of order by trying to do these first, but I just needed to know if there was gonna be a problem here, and it feels like there is. At the same time, technically I can just put green Loctite on this motor gear and it should be okay, since that's what retaining compound is for. But I'm gonna keep trying here and see if I can get it. I took some time and talked to Ethan, the Newbee contact that I've got, and he said that they're going to take this into consideration on future batches, clean out the threads a little bit more, and consider pre-installing those set screws. This is definitely the biggest sticking point in the assembly of these drives, and if they're pre-installed, that would definitely make me feel a lot better about recommending these to someone who's never assembled gear drives before. So you'll see later what I ended up doing in my setup, but in the future you might have an easier time with this than I did. Alright, so now that I have messed around with the set screws a little bit, let's do this in the actual proper order. So Newbee actually does have a video on how to assemble their whole gear drive, so I suggest if you are confused in this video, you can go check that one out. I'm just showing you guys what my experience is to put it together with some explanation. So the first thing that they do in their video is apply the grease to these gears and assemble the gear drive. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. And I got this white lithium grease to put on here. I believe that this is acceptable. And I will be putting on enough to go around, but not too much. And I'll show you guys what that looks like. Not all lithium grease is created equal, so make sure to check your label and make sure that it is pure lithium grease. Some additives to lithium greases can ruin plastic gears, so make sure you check. So you want to get it nice and in all those teeth, and this stuff is quite messy, so once you put it in there, you don't really want to get your hands all over it. Since these are helical gears, the grease should spread across to the other gears fairly well. I'm going to put just a tiny bit on each of them for good measure though. And be aware that this stuff is going to get absolutely everywhere in the drive case, so I wouldn't worry about getting it in there too much. As long as you don't get it in any of the screw holes, then you should be okay. Go ahead and slide this down there. Also, it's worth mentioning this bearing that I was talking about earlier, I was able to get it out of the casing and put it back into the gear where it should be. So that may happen for you guys when you pull them apart. It may not. Your mileage may vary. So we're just going to go ahead and slot this in and push it down. That sounds like it got most of the way. There we go. And you're going to want to look around the outside. There's a lip in this gear drive that fits into the bottom case, and you'll know it's all connected when you hear that snapping sound of the tolerance going into each other. So now that we've got that in, we can use the screws to close it up, and I'm going to be using blue Loctite on these, which is the, let me check, I think it's the 263 that I have. I was incorrect. It's not 263. I have all three Loctites here. I have 271 red, 242 blue, and then I also have 638 green. So for these gears, or for these screws on the outside of the case, we're going to be using the 242 blue. There's also other variants of blue that could work, but this is the one that I will be using. And we're going to go ahead and find our secure the gear drive covers screws, which will be your M4x8s. There are 12 of them. We're going to go ahead and put those in. I'm just going to set them in their locations, and then we'll screw them in a second. It looks like he might be providing extra ones. Yeah. There's a couple extra in there, it appears, just in case you lose them. So we're going to go ahead and apply some blue to each of these screws and screw it in. Take our 2.5mm Allen wrench and screw it in. There we go. Now we can turn the gears and spread that grease around. Feels very smooth. I think this gear drive is going to be nice and quiet. Alright, that's spread out enough. Now we're going to go ahead and do the same exact thing for the other side. Alright, so we've now got our two gear drive portions assembled with the gears greased up and everything. Now our next step is to move on to the motor side, and I'm going to do the rest of this a little bit in a different order than the Newbee video. So for this step, you're going to have to Loctite your motor gears onto your motor shafts, and then after that you're going to attach your motor plate to your motor itself. Now there's a couple interesting things to note here. So I'm going to do this in a very specific order, and you'll see why. So if you're doing this along with me, watch the whole video first and then come back and do it in the correct order. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to put some green Loctite on the motor shaft because green Loctite is retaining compound, which is slightly different than thread locker. The video that Newbee has suggests red, which can also work, but we're going to use green because I have it. And we're going to use that to attach the pulley onto the shaft, and then we're going to use some red Loctite for the tiny little grub screws that go inside of the threads that were pretty difficult for me to get in. So we're not going to do anything with this plate yet, but you must put it onto the shaft before putting your Loctite and stuff on there. So that's that. We also are going to want the keyways. If you have a 8mm shaft motor, you're going to have a spot for a key in the pulley. If you have a 10mm shaft motor, you will not. That's purely due to the size of the gear and how much space there was for them to cut a keyway. So we've got our 2 keyways from FlipSky that come with the motors, and we're going to put those in to the motors themselves. So let's take our green Loctite, pull that off, and we're just going to put a little bit inside of the keyway. On both of the motors. And we're going to stick the keys in them. You can see a little bit oozes out. That's okay, obviously, because we're going to be putting the motor gear on it in a second. Although I want to make sure it doesn't drip down into the bearing, so I guess I'll soak up a little bit of that. In any case, this is kind of just to help hold the keyway in. Now we can put the Loctite on the motor shaft, and then we will put the gear on. So we're just gonna put a fair amount on there. And one thing to note is you don't need any kind of special length motor shaft for these, although one that is too short may cause problems. So if you're looking for motors, you can get regular FlipSky ones with a full 30mm shaft length, and you won't need to cut them down or anything. The 30mm shaft fits perfectly all the way to the end of the gear. So I'm not going to put this all the way down to the bottom, because when we put the gear on, it will smoosh it down there anyway. It's actually probably a good idea to leave these horizontal until you're ready, because the Loctite will run a little bit. And again, you definitely don't want to get it inside your bearing. So we'll let that sit for a second, and then we're going to put some green Loctite inside of the pulley. Just a bit, not too much. Make sure it gets in the keyway nicely. Now, one thing to keep in mind with either green or red, they're more permanent Loctites, so if you ever have to disassemble this, good luck, you're probably gonna need a blowtorch, so just keep that in mind. That is the case for the Board Dynamics gear drives as well, since you use green Loctite on those. So now, we definitely want to put on the motor plate. If you don't, you're going to regret that when you realize it later. Line up your keyway with the key, and you should be able to easily slide it on. I think my set screws in the way here. You can easily slide it on and make sure it goes all the way down to the end. You'll see the motor shaft will bottom out and fit up there nicely. At least with mine, since I have the FlipSky with the full length. We have to do one more step to ensure that these are secure, and that is dealing with the set screws. Now, these are kind of annoying, not gonna lie. So I put these in first, and now what we're going to do is we're going to put a little dab of red Loctite in there, and that should be hopefully enough to hold it in place. We'll just go back and forth a couple times, and I do need to make sure that this isn't going to be in the actual channel, because if it is, then we can't use it. I spoke a little bit too soon about the set screws. So technically, there is no problem at all. And the main reason for that is that the actual gear that this will end up meshing with is only 12 millimeters deep, which I'll show you guys on the camera in a second here. 12 millimeters actually only comes to about there. So you have plenty of space for that set screw to clear. So there definitely should not be any problem if the set screw sticks a little bit into the gear teeth. I just thought there was on initial look, but yeah, here we are. I'm still gonna leave the set screw out because I just already took it out. So I'm gonna leave it out for mine, and I'll let you guys know what happens. All right, so for the next steps, I've got my board back on the table. As you can see here, we have the bare Apex Air ready to be mounted on. Now the next step is going to be positioning the gear drive at the appropriate angle. These are adjustable, so I want to make sure I pick the right angle before I tighten it on there. Now, apparently according to the Newbee video, you're supposed to position this with the flat spot facing the motor. I'm not really sure if that matters at all, but I guess we'll do that. So we'll probably place it maybe like this. I don't think it matters at all, so I'm actually going to place it with the flat spot facing down, because that will make it easiest for me to tighten the screw from the top. So, and also the set screw will be on top as well. So we're going to figure that out, but the first thing we need to do is actually put the plates on the wheels so we can position how far in this is. Now this is one interesting point I'm not sure if I like as much, is that the gear drive gets positioned entirely off of where the wheel is. So if you happen to have different wheels that meet up at a different spot, you could have issues, but we're gonna set it, and hopefully it'll just work for everything. So for these, you're going to need more screws. So temporarily, we will stick the screws in. Here, for mounting the clamps. Got these M4 by 18 screws, and I'm just gonna stick a couple of them on here to hold it temporarily, and then we'll set the angle more permanently in a moment. I'm just guessing that this is about the angle that I will want this at. I'm pretty sure that will be good, so I'm going to temporarily finger tighten these down. So I've got some wheels here. I've come to a realization. The way that you attach these plates to the wheels is via the screws. Most of the time, these screws go all the way through the wheel. As you can see here, I have my Boardnetics GT3 rim, which has my street tires on it that I ride all the time. And in order to attach this on here, we have to deal with this issue, which is, one, the nut is stacked, and then you would have this screwed into it as well. But the bigger issue is the fact that I have my tube reverse mounted here, because if I have it forward mounted, it'll be very hard to fill. So I don't think this is the only rim out there that has this feature or design. So that'll be difficult to deal with if you've got one of these. So I'm going to be using these 3D printed hubs for the time being to test them out, and these ones I'm not as worried about because the stem is facing forwards, and I don't think it'll be as big a deal to unscrew these screws. So we're gonna go ahead and do that right now. Alright, so we've got one mounted up. Used it as a giant nut, put some blue Loctite in there, and you can see the screws stick through a little bit, but I already checked, that's not a problem at all. There's enough space between here and the gear drive that it won't touch anything. So seems to have worked pretty well. We'll have to see how it holds up. Yeah, gonna go do the other one next. Alright, so I've been messing around with this for a bit, trying to figure out what the best way is to set this gear drive, and I'm concerned about switching wheels. So I put these wheels on first, and I was thinking that there was a ton of axle space left because this wheel is super skinny. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna switch to a bigger one to make sure that we space it out properly. And what I got on here right now is some spacers that I had for my board dynamics gear drives that I'm going to utilize here because the apex areas have very long axles. And I got this mounted up, seems to be proper, I'm pretty sure. And so I got this stuck on here. We got still quite a bit of axle left, but I can deal with that. So I think I'm gonna set the gear drives at this spot on the axle, and I'll move the camera to show you in a second, but they do have to get pulled this way quite a bit, and I think that's fine. I think there will be enough space on the hanger. So I'm gonna move the camera and I'll show you what I'm talking about. All right, so the way you set these gear drives is by moving this in or out according to where your wheel is. Now you can move it all the way out to there, which is quite far, and you can move it all the way into, you know, as far as your hanger allows you. So for us, I got these two spacers on here, which for reference are, I believe, 8 millimeters each, so around 16 millimeters, either 16 or 20. And that's about where I want them, because that also works with the other wheel. It still needs quite a bit of spacing, but it is what it is. So I'm going to go ahead and set this in the correct spot for the 9-inch, the Newbee pentagram wheel rather. So we'll go ahead and stick the wheel on, and that will be its place, and we'll put the wheel nut on to hold it in place. As you can see, the tire is deflated right now because obviously I had to take loose the screws for the wheel to put on the adapter. So we'll tighten this down. And as you're gonna see, there's gonna be some axle sticking out, which is okay. So now we've got the wheel mounted in the correct place. Now we can set the gear drive properly. As you can see, I've pulled it up to the wheel. It can no longer move. So now what we can do is focus on the actual adapter part, and we're going to put in the screw for that, which is one of these big gigantic ones, and use some red Loctite on that as well, and that will be able to hold the gear drive in place. And since this hub is nice and wide, I should be able to mess around with spacers and washers in order to set whatever other hubs I want to put on here. I'm going to go ahead and put some red Loctite on this screw, and then we'll put it in. I'm a little wary about using red because I feel like I might have to move this, but given the large size of this fastener, I don't think it'll be too hard to get off if I need to. So we're just going to give it a nice coating. And hopefully it will not wiggle loose. And then this will go in to the hole here. And grab the appropriate, I think 5mm, yeah, 5mm Allen wrench. And we're going to screw it all the way in. And we'll do one last check and make sure that the gear drive is pressed all the way against the wheel. And go ahead and start to tighten it down. Tighten it down using the long way first. Make sure it's still set properly, which it does appear to be. Let's double check. Looks like there's a little gap to me. It is a little bit hard to tell if you have it seated all the way, but I guess if you just do your best, it'll be okay because you have that nice urethane spacer in there. So the last bit of the tightening is where you really get the nice fit. So you want to make sure you do that nice and evenly and make sure it's tight because that is the only thing holding it on currently. We're also going to put a set screw in this hole, although I'm not 100% sure how much that actually does. I also am not really a fan of set screws going on hangers because it mars the surface and makes removing them later a bit annoying, but that's the design, so got to go with it. So we've got this pretty nice and tight on there. I think that hanger or the clamp has deformed properly to the hanger. It's very tight. So now we're going to go ahead and put this set screw in, which is also in the same bag as the clamp screws. This one I'm going to put blue on because I really don't want to have a problem taking this out if I need to. So I'm gonna put blue 242 on it. So put some down in the hole first. Okay, and then onto the set screw, which is a cupped end one, as I would expect. And that is going to go into the hole, if I can get the Allen wrench. This is going to be a 1mm Allen wrench, I believe. Yep, getting Loctite all over the place. All right, there we go. And that's going to go down inside, so let's wipe off the extra Loctite and finish screwing it in. It is quite deep in there, so you just have to be aware of that. And this one is one of those ones where it's hard to tell how tight you should make it, because you definitely don't want to strip it. So we'll just press that in nice and tightly and then get a decent amount of torque, and then the Loctite will do the rest, as well as the big clamp bolt. So now we've got that mounted on there, and it's wobbling because the tire isn't inflated anymore, but that is to be expected. So now we've got that set, we can take off the wheel and see how it looks. All right, so that's what we're looking like here. You can see the spacers there. It's looking pretty good. Now that we've got this set at an appropriate place, you can see switching between a large wheel and a small wheel. And the small one is quite easy. Easy and quick, no problems. All right, so going back to the motors, as you recall, I left these plates free, and we've done all these steps up to this point to get to figure out which direction I want the motor wires to face for my enclosure. So this plate mounts onto the gear drive using screws to go through the gear drive. So we want to make sure this is set at the right angle. And it so happens that this plate needs to be at the angle where the flats line up with the angle of the drive. So looking at that, we can set our wires in the appropriate orientation to go into my enclosure. And that ends up with the screw holes being like this. And this is how we're going to fasten it. So I'm going to go ahead and use some blue Loctite, put on the 4 motor bolts, and then we'll get on to the next step. It's also worth mentioning that these are the screws for the motor. Now that we've got the motor mounting plates all tightened up and Loctited down, we can mount the motors to the gear drive. So what we're going to do is just stick it in and put the screws in it. But before that, we've got to get the screws out, which are the M4x30s. And you'll need 4 of those. And we're going to put some blue Loctite down inside of the holes that we're going to be using. So it'll be the inner 2 ones here, and the outer 2 on the bottom. I'll also put some Loctite on the screws here. Now that those are all ready, I can use them to align the plate and get it screwed in. Now the motor plate mounts into a little joggle recess, which is a little difficult to get it in. But once you get it in, you shouldn't have any issues. Although this seems to be quite difficult to align. So I'm not sure what's going on there. All right, so apparently these are directional. So I ended up having to flip this plate 180 degrees around the rotation of the motor shaft. And now this channel is pointing towards the wires, which will go into here. And now so we get the gears aligned. There we go. We should be able to put these in. And all 4 of them should go in. Instead of only 2. There we go. So that's very interesting, and you definitely should pay attention to that when you're installing these on here. Go around and tighten it down. There we go. Now we've got a gear drive that spins the motor. Very nice. All right, so we've got this whole side of the gear drive installed, and I think I'm going to install the other side on my own, and then I'll catch up with you guys at the end. There's not really much else to do here, so yeah, I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side. I'll be right back. All right, so I went ahead and installed the left or the right side, whatever, the other drive onto the hanger, and now the only thing that's left is to put the wheel on each of the sides. So I'm gonna do that, and then we'll do a couple closing remarks, and at the very end, I'll tease the sound of it, of me riding, for the next video. All right, guys, so it is all done. After a decent amount of toil and a couple small issues, we have fully assembled the Newbee gear drives, and I'm very excited to use them. They seem like they're gonna be decently quiet drives with pretty decent free roll, but mostly I'm interested to see how they hold up to small jumps, going off curbs, you know, that basic stuff. And then soon after that, we'll go ahead and take it off-road with the big old 9-inch tires and see if they can hold up to that as well. So yeah, hopefully you guys were able to follow along well enough throughout this video. It's probably gonna be a pretty long one. It was quite complicated. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed. Stay safe, keep on riding, and peace out.